Welcome to Leaders Get Real. Inspirational interviews with today's authentic leaders. I'm your host, Christy Tong, bringing you insightful interviews with best-selling authors and with leaders who are purposeful, passionate, and authentic. Gain compelling insights as they share the challenges and rewards of leading with authenticity and impact. Liz Wiseman is the New York Times bestselling author of Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter. Liz has been listed on the Thinkers 50 ranking and named one of the top 10 leadership thinkers in the world. She writes for Harvard Business Review and Fortune. Liz is a former vice president at Oracle, where she worked for 17 years. She's now the CEO of the Wiseman Group, with recent clients including Facebook, Apple, Disney, Nike, Tesla, and Twitter. In this conversation, we talk about her book, Multipliers. Liz has rock-solid research and compelling insights. She's the real deal. Authentic, smart, funny, and ultra-practical. You're in for a treat. Liz, I am so energized about having our conversation today. Welcome to Leaders Get Real.
Oh, well, Christy, I'm glad to be on your podcast.
Yeah, I have been looking forward to this interview because I love your book, Multipliers. And when I give book recommendations to the executives I coach, Multipliers is definitely one of the books that I recommend the most often. And I have found your book so provocative. It just has a different stretch than most other leadership books.
It's funny you say that provocative, because when I finished the book and we were gathering up some endorsements, I remember one of them came back saying it's a subversive book. And I wasn't sure if I should be worried about that or flattered, because I do think it is a very different look at leadership.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people it's an advanced maneuver. I mean, I've read a lot of leadership books. The people I coach have often been there, done that. And this just, I think, provides more of a growing edge and challenges people in a different way. So let's talk about it. Share with us, what's the premise of the book?
Well, the book is about intelligence and how leaders use intelligence, and really how the intelligence of a leader can affect the intelligence of their team. And you might think that really smart people, when they're put into leadership roles, end up, building really smart team. That maybe that their intelligence is infectious. But what we find is that there are a number of really smart people who end up dumbing down their teams, that they may be smart, but people around them don't get to be smart or don't need to be smart. That the team becomes really reliant on the intelligence or the genius of the leaders. And I came to call these leaders diminishers because they have this diminishing effect on the intelligence and capability of people around them. And I contrast that with a very different kind of leader that I have come to call multipliers, who use their own intelligence in a way that provokes intelligence and ideas and know-how and capability in people around them, that they're not playing solely the role of genius. They're also playing the role of genius maker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that phrase. Yes, I've heard in some of your speaking engagements where you say, do you want to be a genius? And, it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Or who doesn't? Who doesn't want to be a genius?
Yeah. And then you ask, or do you want to be a genius maker? And that's a powerful question, really at the heart of your book.
Well, and I think it's a fundamental question that leaders should be asking themselves, which is, which role do you tend to play? Mm-hmm. And it's also a question we can ask ourselves on a daily basis or on an hour by hour basis. You come out of a meeting and you might ask yourself, what role did I play there? Was I the genius trying to have all the answers, telling people what to do? Or was I playing a multiplier role? Was I the genius maker in that meeting? I really do think that at the top of the intelligence hierarchy is not the genius, but truly the one who brings out genius in others because it's a more scalable way of leading.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm a highlighter when I read books. I know audiobooks are, the latest, but I still love my paper version and highlighting it. And one of the things I highlighted is when you talked about what you get when you're a multiplier. And, you get more intelligent action, more adept problem solving, and more concentrated effort. How powerful is that? I mean, talk about competitive advantage.
Did I write that?
I think you did. Does it sound
Because
good?
reading that, I'm like, wow, that sounds good. And yeah, I wrote the first edition of the books 8 years ago. So some of those sentences, they're like old friends that I get reacquainted with. But you really do, and this is the premise. And the point of the book is that it's not just a moral imperative like, oh, gee, you should be the kind of leader that brings out the best in others because that's what good guys do.
Mm-hmm.
The argument extends beyond that. It's that leaders who play the multiplier role using their own intelligence to provoke ideas and intelligence in others, they get more from people, better ideas, as it said, a concentrated effort. And what we found is that these diminishing leaders get less than half of people's available intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And it, of course, it's built on this observation I had. It came from my time as a corporate leader myself. Was that there really is a lot more intelligence available to us
Mm-hmm.
than we're using. Like there's more intelligence available to a typical department manager than that department manager is seeing and using. That there's latent or
Mm-hmm.
hidden intelligence
Mm-hmm.
all around us, and these multiplier leaders get twice the levels of intellect and know-how from their people than these diminishers do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you just mentioned your industry experience, which you were at Oracle for how many years?
I was there for 17 years, which probably, there's probably a multiplier factor on that too, that 17 years at Oracle. So I'm kind of like a car with low years, high miles is how I always saw myself because I joined Oracle in this accelerated rapid growth phase in the
Yes.
company, and they were just exploding as a company. I get thrown into management at 24 years old, like a child. Like literally I felt like a child who
Mm-hmm.
just got put into like an adult job. And so yeah, there's a lot of miles
Yes.
on me as I tried to help grow that company.
Yes. And to be an executive at the company that's so demanding and rigorous from the culture that I know there, certainly you've gained a lot of thick skin and a lot of insights about leading being there. And what I love about your book is that it's grounded in such solid research. So tell us about your research underneath the multipliers.
Mm. Well, I'm glad that research comes through. I think it's my post Oracle. The book in some ways was my post Oracle therapy, trying to understand, why is it that some leaders seem to amplify intelligence while others drain it. But I came out of a data company, and so it
Mm-hmm.
never occurred to me that you would write a book without doing a lot of thorough research. So we did look and we studied. Kind of at the core of the research was looking at people's experience with different leaders and assessing through their own perceptions how much of their know-how and capability these leaders got, and then also assessing these leaders on a variety of different scales. And we found that they get twice the levels of intellect. There's over 40% better at getting world-class results. So they tend to, have a stronger execution and delivery orientation. Bottom line is we looked at a number of different measures that show that these leaders simply get more from people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it involves uh, getting a little bit less from yourself. But
Say more.
this is it's kind of simple math. If I try to be 10% more productive myself. And if I'm successful, I get 10% more productivity. But if I manage a team of 10 and I lead in a way that the people on my team that get 10% more productive, and I don't get an ounce, a percentage more productive, like this is very basic math that to me is really compelling. In fact, one time when I was at Oracle, I was a new manager, and I probably grew up with a little bit of an overdeveloped work ethic. I have to admit it. And I think honestly, Christy, it comes from having been fired from my first job as a teenager, because I had a little bit of a lackadaisical attitude about my job working in this T-shirt store in a mall in San Jose. But yeah, I think it caused me to develop this overdeveloped sense of work ethic, of really working hard and really making sure I made a full contribution. And my boss, I'm a brand new manager. I think I'm probably 25 years old at the time. He stops by my office and he said, just out of nowhere, he said, Liz, as far as I'm concerned, you can read novels all day long as long as your team is productive. And I could see that there was like a teaching message in this, but I was so twisted up about the read novels all day long. I'm like, well, first of all, I don't read a lot of novels. I'm kind of a nonfiction sort of gal myself. But I was just baffled by this. I'm like, what is he saying? Does he want me to sit here and put my feet up? Because like it violated my work ethic. And it took me probably at least several hours, if not several days or weeks, to really process what he was saying to me, which is, you and your personal productivity aren't what matter here. You're now leading a team. And essentially what he was sensitizing to me was this multiplier effect, which is, and so instead of focusing on how many things on my to-do list I got crossed off, I started to focus on, how do I move work to other people and keep it there? How do I ensure that other people can be smart and competent and capable? But sometimes it means turning down our own volume a little bit, or not necessarily holding back, because you mentioned the word edge, Christy, that, there's a certain edge here. And part of it is these leaders have a hard edge. And it's not that they dial themselves down to zero and they're these kind of empty-headed facilitative leaders that, don't bring their own ideas or their own sort of game to it. It's, they play big, but they play in a way that invites other people to be big. And in some ways they temper their own strengths to make room for other people's strengths to come into view. And to get into the game.
You described that so well. I mean, it just brings up for me the hard part of this. I mean, the people I'm coaching to make that transition. And, these are folks who's like, I'm really competent. I'm really like, I've always been promoted and I've always been, I'm proud of the fact that I can get stuff done and I'm really good at it and I can make things happen. And then
surely my team wants all of this. Like they want me and all of my capability. But it comes at a price, doesn't it? When leaders are just constantly big and brilliant.
Yeah. So well described.
One of my favorite stories about this was, Magic Johnson's early experience as an athlete. And, a lot of people know him as a great athlete. I think of him as just an amazing leader. He's an amazing business leader. He's leading the Lakers now as the president of basketball operations. And he shares this experience he had at a very young man. So, this is Magic Johnson, of course, who wasn't born Magic Johnson. He was Irvin Johnson Jr. And, for those listening who maybe aren't basketball fans, we're talking about basketball. And he's growing up, this, kid in Michigan. He's a high school player, and he has this experience that really shapes the way that he plays. It shapes the way that he leads for the rest of his life. And so you imagine he's a total phenom, absolute phenom. And his coach said to him, Irvin, every time you get the ball, I want you to, you might think he would say pass,
Mm-hmm.
but his coach actually said to him, Irvin, every time you get the ball, I want you to take the shot.
Mm.
So he did. And, he scored a lot of points and they won a lot of games. In fact, they won every game. They were undefeated. And of course, the coach loves it because they're this, he's this coachable kid. He's doing exactly what the coach is asking of him. And the other players actually love it because, what young high school kid doesn't want to be on an undefeated team?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's like glory days every game. And but then, so win after win after win, they come to one game and they win, of course. And young Irvin, as the game finished, they finished their celebrating, and the players are now leaving the high school gymnasium with their parents. They're headed out to the parking lot, and he sees the faces of the parents,
Mm.
who, of course, came to see their kid play. And what did they get to see? They get to see sort of a one-man show. And I think it was that disappointment on the faces of the parents that caused him to make a commitment to himself that he would use his God-given talent
Mm-hmm.
to help everyone on the team be a better player.
Mm-hmm.
And he reoriented himself. In some ways, he had become, from a basketball and a physicality and a talent perspective, he had become an accidental diminisher to his team simply by just being big and using all of his capability. And it's not like, and the reason why I love this example is he didn't then decide he was going to be like most inspirational, cheer the team for the sidelines, go into coaching, whatever. He played huge, but he played in a way that invited everyone else to play at their very best.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually this orientation that gave him this nickname of Magic. It was a Michigan sports writer who said he just raises the level of play of every team he ever plays on.
Mm.
And I think this is what it's like to be a multiplier or a genius maker, as we called it before, is what, it's asking yourself, what effect do you have on people? Do people hold back around you? Do they defer to you? Do they just pass to you and you take all the shots? Or do you raise the level of play for everyone on your team, even the ones that maybe don't seem like the smartest person in the world?
Mm-hmm.
But can they get smarter and more capable with the right kind of leadership?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you just used this phrase accidental diminisher, and that's one of my favorite things about your book. And when I talk about these concepts with folks, it's easy when they hear the terms to go, "Oh, I know some diminishers." And they think about those jerks, right? That shut people down and, railroad right over people, and they're assholes, so to speak. But
And we all know them.
yes,
And
yes.
they tend to dominate the headlines, but that's not where the real story of leadership comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. But the accidental diminishers, I think that's just brilliant to put our finger on that the way you have, is we're doing it and we don't even know it. And we're doing some good things, in our concept of leading and wanting to model by our example or some things like that. But tell us a little bit more about this whole idea of accidental diminisher. Maybe an example in a business context where a leader with really good intentions in the way he or she was leading was unknowingly doing diminisher behaviors.
Yeah. Well, it was the big surprise of the research. I wasn't that surprised to find out that the multipliers and diminishers did very different things. And in the book, I outlined the 5 fundamental differences between these kinds of leaders, and I wasn't really surprised to find that these multipliers got more from other people. 2x, I was surprised by the extreme difference between these two leaders, but I was very surprised, and I continue to be surprised, that most of the diminishing that's happening in our companies, in our nonprofits, in our schools, and I would toss in there in our families and our social groups, is most of it's coming from the accidental diminisher that has really good intentions and
Mhm.
is often following a popular management practice, but yet they're having a diminishing impact.
Mhm.
And, it's funny you mentioned, like, there was a lot of rigorous research that went into really understanding this multiplier effect and the difference between these leaders. But once I realized that so much of the diminishing was accidental, um, I, I I tried to identify the ways that this happened. And, it took me about an hour to do this. And I'll tell you, Christy, part of what I did is I just looked in the mirror.
Mhm.
And I scanned back. I looked in the mirror, like, what do I do that I think is extremely helpful or positive or motivating that
Mhm.
actually tends to shut people down? Now that I really understand what causes people to shut down,
Mhm.
and I scanned and thought about the people who I've worked with over the years and the good things they do that seem like they're on track, but they actually suppress capability. You you asked for an example. Maybe I'll give you my favorite examples. They're because they're just I,
Mhm.
I am my own favorite accidental diminisher because I can see my good intentions, and of course we've probably all heard some variety of this saying that we tend to judge people by their actions,
Mhm.
but we judge ourselves by our good intentions.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I'll share a few of the ways that this happens for me. I'm an idea guy, and I love ideas. I love innovation. I love creative environments. And so, I often would come into a meeting and say, well, what about this? And have you thought about this? And have you tried that? And I
Mhm.
think I'm just, getting the party started. I'm sparking
Mhm.
creativity. But, what happens around the idea guy? Like, what do you do when someone's constantly spouting ideas?
Mhm. Oh gosh. You just yeah, you've nailed me.
Are you the same way? So you might not even see the
Yes.
ramifications. Is like, so people like you and me who are just like, full of ideas,
Mhm.
either we lead people on sort of a rabbit chase, like, oh, hey, how about this? How about that? And people end up chasing ideas, making, you know, a millimeter of progress in a million different directions. And
Mhm.
and when you do that day after day, you start to get apathetic and you start to tell yourself, I don't need to come up with any idea. Like, I don't need to really pursue any of these ideas because they don't go anywhere.
Mhm.
In fact,
Or it's like, well, Liz has got plenty of ideas.
yeah,
Or Chris,
like,
like, oh, well, Christy seemed to have a lot of ideas, right?
yeah, Chrissy's a fountain of ideas. And so if I need to do some thinking, I'm just going to go down to her office because that fountain goes off every hour. I'll just get him there. There was it reminds me of a tech leader. You and I are both here in Silicon Valley, and you know, um, uh, a CEO, a founder CEO of a very prominent tech company, and his CTO, he told me one of the jobs he had as CTO is having to go through the organization and say, kind of ignore the boss,
Mm.
because he was constantly, the CEO, the founder would constantly come in, hey, we should do this, we should try this, these features, that features, and it was extraordinarily disruptive to
Mhm.
the organization. So he had to go and do kind of run interference on that, and he learned to ask his CEO, like, do you actually want us to build that feature into the product? Do you want us to actually start developing that product, or are we just kind of talking creatively here?
Mhm.
And that's an example of how a leader who thinks he or she is sparking innovation
Mhm.
actually is creating a lot of disruption around them and
Mhm.
causing other people to get, we tend to get a little idea lazy
Mhm.
around people who are really idea rich.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's such a great example of how it happens all the time. And I know in reading your book, when I say it's provocative, it definitely opened my eyes to so many ways with good intentions that I'm getting in the way and I'm being an accidental diminisher.
Oh, yeah, we might be, maybe you're a rescuer. You don't like to see people fail or struggle, and so you help maybe too early or too often. Or
Hmm.
maybe um, you respond so quickly that other people end up deferring, or the number one way we see people accidentally diminish. So we've been doing this quiz, are you an accidental diminisher? And you can find it on the book's website, but it's a 3-minute quiz. We've gathered 30,000 data points from this, and I'll tell you, the number one way that people tend to accidentally diminish is by being a pace setter, by leading by example. Thinking, okay, I'll set the pace for customer service, or I'll set the pace for innovation or cost control or revenue growth, whatever seems to be like the value or what's on the agenda for the company. And when the leader sets the pace, it's very easy for them to get out ahead of their team. And, if you've ever tried to drive in a caravan with somebody who's a slow driver, that the more you speed up, saying like, come on, go faster. This is me driving with my mom. Like, I'm always like, Mom, come on, you can go faster. Like, the conditions allow for you to actually drive faster than 55. So I'm speeding up as a way to signal to her, come on, let's go. And what does she do? She slows down. And I'm like, Mom, why did you slow down? She goes, oh, I was trying to tell you I couldn't keep up with you. and it actually happens a lot at work. When the leader gets out ahead of the team, people often don't speed to catch up. They end up falling back. And when we lead by setting the pace for our team, we're more likely to create spectators than followers. People are kind of watching us do our thing. Like, ooh, look, there Liz goes, doing her thing. Like, let me know, Liz, if you need help. Next time you lap me, and people, I think it's one of the things I've learned is that particularly around the accidental diminisher, your team wants to give you more. They want to help. But sometimes for people to help you as a leader, for them to contribute more, you have to help less.
Yeah, and that is so counterintuitive. You've been listening to part 1 of my interview with Liz Wiseman, author of Multipliers. There was way too much good stuff in our interview to cut it down, so there'll be a part 2 to look forward to. In the meantime, you can take the quiz she mentioned to see if you're an accidental diminisher. To find info about the quiz and other resources for becoming a multiplier, go now to leadersgetreal.com and click my podcast tab. Thanks for tuning in today. Please spread the word by sharing this interview with colleagues. And to get an alert for part 2 of my chat with Liz and other upcoming interviews, subscribe at iTunes, leadersgetreal.com, or your favorite podcast app. And until next time, go forth and get real.